Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Do you know what's at least as important as having great sex? In fact, I'm going to say in the context of this video that it's more important than having great sex. It's being able to talk about it. That's right. Because one of the most important positive predictors for having a happy, long-lasting, sexually gratifying marriage is having conversations about the sex that you're having. Of those couples who have long, happy marriages, only 9% are not discussing the sex that they're having. Does that mean you need to have a conversation after every single time you have sex? Of course not. But if you're not having conversations about sex, you are missing out on some really delicious experiences, growth, expansion, and gratification together. Now, if you're not having conversations about sex, that's totally understandable, because by and large, couples are far more comfortable having sex than they are with talking about sex. But I'm telling you, talking about sex is essential to improving sex, having more pleasure, feeling more connected, and enjoying one another's bodies and souls more deeply. Now, when I'm talking about sex, I'm not talking about whispering sexy nothings in your lover's ear. I'm not talking about sexting, sending provocative messages while you're at work. I'm not talking about any of the sexual foreplay, which certainly is very enjoyable. Don't let me discourage you if that's something that you both enjoy. But when I'm talking about having conversations about sex, I literally mean the sex you're having, how you're touching one another, what positions you're in, what kind of music is playing. All these things are very important contributors to enjoying one another's bodies more and having more sexual ecstasy. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Alexandra Stockwell. I'm a physician coach and an intimate marriage expert, and I do relationship and intimacy coaching. I myself have been married for 27 years. My husband and I have 4 children and very full professional lives, and we have an incredible marriage. And it definitely was not always this way, but I know if we're going to be having sex, that it is going to be a wonderful experience. Yes, it definitely was not always that way. We met when we were both in the first week of medical school, and for the first 10 years of our marriage, let's say, first dating, then when we were engaged, then when we got married, and also when we had children, when we started right away. We were medical students and then interns, residents. We were working really hard. And what I'm wanting to convey is that between working 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week and having babies in diapers and all that that involves with them waking up at night and so forth, for at least the first 10 years of our marriage, we didn't have that much time together. So the sex that we were having was good, it was fun, it was functional, but it was nothing like what the poets describe. And afterwards, I felt glad, but most of the time, but I didn't feel more connected to him. I didn't feel like my heart and soul had really opened in a way that matched the orgasms I was having. And I always assumed that once my husband and I had more time together, where we were both at home, neither one of us working at night or on the weekends, when we didn't have babies in diapers, that we would just have more time to enjoy ourselves and one another, and that our sex would expand, deepen, and up level because, after all, we loved one another so much and we had a very good marriage. Well, that time came and we had more time together. But our sex did not just automatically improve or deepen, expand, become more nourishing, more ecstatic. I wanted that. I had never discussed it with my husband. I just assumed that would happen. And it didn't, even though we had time. And this was when I learned that it is not more time that you need. It is more skill, more intention, and more willingness to explore the unknown. And one of the biggest areas of exploring the unknown is starting to have conversations about the sex that you're having. Now, before I get into more specifics about how to have those conversations, I want you to know my primary philosophy when it comes to marriage, good communication, passion, and all the things that make being with another person and sharing your life with them so delicious, gratifying, tender, poignant, and fuel for courage and more contentment in life. Now, throughout the Western world, the most common relationship advice that is given is that you need to learn to compromise. If you want to be happy in marriage, you have to be good at compromising. And that is just completely wrong. If you want to have a bland, pleasant companionship, compromise is absolutely an outstanding way to create that with your spouse. But if you want deep emotional connection, sensual passion, erotic gratification, juicy, dynamic, nourishing times together, then it is essential to be uncompromising. The name of my method that I teach my clients is the uncompromising intimacy methodology. But let me explain what I mean. When it comes to compromise, what you're doing is withholding your desires and what's going on inside you so that your partner is more comfortable. You're prioritizing your partner being comfortable over honoring what is genuinely arising in you. And the fact is, the longer you do that, the less likely that you're even aware of what you want because you're just used to ignoring it. Now, when it comes to uncompromising intimacy, I'm definitely not talking about you always getting your own way. My way or the highway has no place in deepening connection. But when I mean uncompromising, I mean that you share what's important to you. And in the context of this presentation, you learn to share what you enjoy in bed, what you want to explore and find out if you enjoy, what you don't really like, what turns you off, what your needs and desires are. You learn to share all of that in a way that your partner can hear you. So, where compromise is just essentially staying quiet, doing what you've always done, so that your partner is not uncomfortable when hearing what's real for you. Instead, you learn to discover and accept what's real in you. And most importantly, you learn how to share that with your partner in a way that they can receive it. And so, everything I'm about to say about how to have really great conversations about the sex you're having, it's in the context of knowing that the key to passion is authenticity, being true to yourself, and finding the way to share who you really are in a way that your partner can hear it, rather than compromising, tolerating, staying quiet, putting up with things so as not to discomfort your partner. That's really not the way to have great sex and meaningful passion. So, coming back to the subject at hand, there are 3 questions that other couples had that they really want to know the answer to. And I'm going to read what they are. How to talk about what you like and don't like without hurting your partner's feelings. How to discuss what turns you off, and how to discuss wanting to try new things. So I'm going to dive deep into exactly how to do that after really creating the context to show you that if you don't speak up, first of all, it dilutes, tapers off the passion in your marriage. It just contributes to a bland companionship. And if you learn to speak up with grace, respect, and artfulness, well, then you get to be one of the 91% of couples who have happy, long-lasting marriages, who actually have conversations about the sex that they're having, because that contributes to the quality of the sex and the quality of the happiness with one another overall. Okay, so let's start with how to get started in having a conversation. I'm going to begin with the initial assumption that you're not having conversations about sex with your partner and never really have, because what I'm going to say, if that's your situation, there's still going to be a lot that's very valuable if you're already having conversations with your spouse, things that you can tweak and adjust or expand on. So let me be very clear that the vast majority of couples are more comfortable having sex than talking about it. So it can sometimes be the kind of thing where, I'm a grown up. I can even talk to my child about sex as needed when they turn 12 or whatever age you've chosen to do this. In many families, that would be too late. In some families, that would be a little early. But regardless, even if you can push yourself through the discomfort of having a conversation like this about with your child, having one with your husband, with your wife, it's incredible how awkward that is and how much easier it is to just have sex. So I want you to know I'm sympathetic to that being the case. And there's so many ways that this can go wrong, with hurt feelings and feeling disrespected, rejected, and most of all contracted, so that it's hard to relax in the way that's really necessary for wonderful sexual connection. So with that in mind, let's talk about how to get started. My recommendation is that if this is a brand new topic, you set the stage by saying something like, honey, I love how we parent together. We really are so collaborative in our parenting. Obviously, if you don't feel that way, don't say it. You're going to find something. I love how we manage our finances together. I love how devoted we both are to our church. I really enjoy the way we've figured out the landscaping. Pick one or many areas of your life together that you do feel good about, that you've co-created, that you haven't just put up with one another and made it happen. Even if it's that you've done the interior design in the home and your spouse has been supportive without even making decisions. Like, find something, find areas that you feel really good about and name them and express your gratitude, acknowledge that, and then say, and I'd really love to uplevel our sex so that it also is an area where we feel connected, supportive. Like, let's take what's working so well in whatever area you've chosen and learn to have that kind of success when we're touching one another too. That's one way you might open it. Another way you might open it is without any kind of context setting and preamble, because the first thing that I'm going to suggest you do is begin by reminiscing about wonderful sexual experiences together. You're basically going to compliment your spouse and acknowledge the magic you've made. So it could have been a long time ago. You might say, remember that evening when we were in Italy on vacation? That was really spectacular together. Or you might say, you know, that night when you got home from that business trip and you brought the flowers? I'm saying things like, you'll know what it is when you think back to times you really enjoyed together. And you can think back, reminisce, say how lovely it was. And if you're just starting out, it might be in general terms, like I've just said. Remember that night when you got back from Chicago and we hadn't seen one another in a while? I was just remembering how good it felt. That's a perfectly good place to start that's very vague. But as soon as it's comfortable to do that, you want to advance to include more specificity. So, for example, remember that night when you got back from the work trip in Chicago and you ran your hand down my back and down into my pants? I just felt so electric. Now, I know I'm giving my personality and conveying a certain level of juiciness and ease with sexual energy. You don't need to imitate me. You be you. You do it in the way that is honest for you. And I suppose the examples that I've given were more from a woman's perspective, so let me do some differently. Remember when you finished that project and you told me you were available to connect? That was such a beautiful night. Or, you know, when I got back from Chicago and you were busy and you actually had like dough on your hands, you were kind of messy because you'd been cooking and doing finger painting with the kids, and we just went into the bedroom. That was one of the highlights of my life. There are ways that you can do this, speaking to times you've had together, that essentially are affirming for your partner that the two of you have pleasure together, that you enjoy him or her, that you've had some wonderful times together. And I gave examples as though they were in the past, but you know what? If it was last night, by all means, refer to last night. The point is that you want to open by really talking about the successes you've had. Start with the celebrations, start with the memories that you feel really good about. And if you don't have any that are explicitly sexual, then start with the affection and touching you like. I just love the way you put your head on my shoulder when we were watching the movie last night. You know, one of my favorite things is to hold hands as we walk downtown. I love feeling your body so close to mine and the warmth in your hand. It just makes me feel so connected. Start wherever you are. Don't push it, because in order for these conversations and then the sex that follows to be wonderful, authenticity is essential. So don't say that you really loved something that you didn't love. Don't fake it. Be you and open up the conversation with reminiscing about beautiful times together. And once that no longer feels so uncomfortable or so unusual, in fact, it feels fun to have positive, productive conversations that may be long, may be short, whatever it is, but you've opened the channel to have conversations about sex through having conversations about good sex you've had. Now, we're going to move to the next thing, which is to bring up things you'd like to try that are new. And once you've been talking about the things that have been going well, it's actually not that big a pivot to then say, you know, it was so fun when we did this. And actually, I'd really love to try this. Are you open to that? Or, you know, we're always in the same positions. Either you're on top or I'm on top. I'd really like to try something different. I want to try sitting up, or, pick whatever it is that you want. I want to try doing it in the shower. Like, just pick something. And if you have a kind of a fantasy or some desire to experience something which is way beyond what the two of you have been doing, I don't recommend you start with that. Because, as with everything in life, well, let me just say, I was saying to a client recently, in order for someone to run a marathon, they start with rolling over and then crawling. Everyone who's ever won a marathon race started with that. Similarly, start with training wheels and trust that you're going to be an awesome mountain biker. So when it comes to introducing new things you want to try, I really suggest you start with just a very little adjustment, because initially the biggest learning curve will be on trying something new. So let the new thing you try be relatively not confronting. And the more that you try new things and trust that even if it doesn't go well, it's an adventure you're having together, then you can introduce the bigger things that you might be really scared to say because you think your spouse might reject you. Do not start with that. Look for ways to just dial up the spiciness, the passion, the excitement, the newness a little bit at a time. And not only does that prepare for whatever bigger thing you'd like to try if you happen to have one, but also doing this just adds more excitement, more energy, more of the uncompromising vibe. And this, even if you're doing things that are familiar, you're going to have so much more pleasure if you can introduce the excitement that comes with trying something new in a different way. Now, the other thing that I want to say about trying new things is there are two elements to that. One is wanting to try whatever new technique you'd like to try, or new location, or try role play. I'm sure throughout this seminar, there are various different examples of what you might want to try. But the point is that there are two different new kinds of experiences, categories of new things. One is a particular technique or thing that you do with your body and your partner's body. And the other is to really look at it as wanting to have a new feeling. And whatever it is that you want to experience, the new thing you want to try that you have been concerned to tell your spouse that you aren't really sure how to bring it up, I really encourage you to focus on the feeling you're after. So, for example, are you interested in prolonging the time of pleasure before orgasm? Are you interested in feeling more surrendered? Are you interested in feeling more connected? Are you interested in having more of your body engaged in the experience and not only your genitals? I mean, what it could be is any number of things, but depending on the culture of your marriage and how you approach things, you might start by saying what feeling you're after, or you might start by saying what technique you're after or you want to try. But either way, include both. Because for the person who had no idea this is what you want, one of the questions that's going to arise in their mind is why? Like, why is what we're doing not good enough? Like, what is it? And don't leave that person to make up all kinds of stories, both consciously and unconsciously. It's just going to create barriers between the two of you. And also, if you share how you want to feel, then your partner can join you in creating that experience. If what you want to feel is more dominant and masculine and strong, well, let her know so that she can partner with more submissiveness. And if what she wants is to feel more self-expressed, then you can really encourage that as well. These are just examples. And obviously, let me just make clear that before you bring up what it is that you want to try, be sure to be clear with yourself. What is the feeling you're after? And what is the technique you think might deliver that? So that you're able to introduce both of those in the conversation if that's what makes sense for the two of you. So to just briefly review, you're going to start by reminiscing on what has gone well. What have you enjoyed with one another? Become comfortable having conversations about sex. And two, in a calibrated way, starting small, share the new things that you want to do, focusing both on the technique itself and the feeling you want to have together. And I'll emphasize that too. You can't really say too many times with you. I want to experience this with you. Well, I guess you can. That could get annoying. But the point is that when you introduce something new, the other person can feel inadequate. And so you want to address that by saying, I want to experience this with you, and I want to see how we both enjoy it afterwards. And if we don't need to do it again. But if we do, it'll be special to be able to do this sexual thing with one another. Okay, now that takes me to the third type of conversation about sex that you would have with your spouse, and that is sharing what you don't like, what turns you off. And this, I hope you see, is much simpler if you're already having conversations about the sex you're enjoying, and you've also learned to have conversations about what you'd like to try. Because in that context, You're on an exploratory adventure together, and you're co-creating and discovering what will work. And so what doesn't work is a very important part of that conversation. In fact, if your partner or you introduce something you'd like to try, then afterwards you want to compare notes on what you liked, and don't be so um, binary and blanket about it. It's not like, yes, it was good or no, it wasn't. It's like, it might be that was amazing. And it might be, I didn't really enjoy that so much, but this part, that's something I'd be open to. Not the whole thing, but just that thing we did. You want to make sure that you have conversations afterwards, after trying something new, in order to know how it was for one another and what else you can learn. And that also is going to make it easier to just bring up things that you don't like and what turns you off. Now, my most important principle with this is I want to refer to a basic idea in parenting, right? Whether or not we all do this, we are familiar with the idea that when misbehavior happens, the child isn't bad. It was just that behavior that was bad. So if, I don't know, a child takes a marker and draws on your white wall when they're little and you think old enough to know better, but also clearly not, then it's very easy to say, how come you and you know, you're bad. Not that you would put it that way, but it can have that feeling. And instead, we want to be able to say, you're a good child. Putting red marker on the white wall is not a good thing to do. So this is not a presentation about parenting. I just want to refer to that concept and then bring it into this, that the main thing is to learn to emphasize it's not that you're turned off by your spouse, it's that you're turned off by this particular sexual activity. And really distinguishing those two is going to be very helpful, especially in the context of talking about wonderful experiences you've had and making it clear that you want to have more wonderful experiences together and that you are happy to be collaborating with your spouse and creating them. In that context, is actually fairly straightforward, but still worth emphasizing that it's that thing that turns you off, not your spouse that turns you off. Now, let's see, in terms of other things to say so you don't hurt feelings, what I really want to convey is it's all in setting the context. And everything I've been talking about today is to help you set up a context so that you can say things that aren't to your liking and that you trust. And you can even say, so I want to tell you something. And the reason I want to tell it to you is because I want us to both be having more pleasure together. If that is either said or conveyed other ways, then saying what you don't like and what isn't working for you is in service of the bigger vision of having more great sex together, as opposed to it being just plain pointing out your partner's inadequacy or annoying sexual behavior. To drive this home even more deeply, I want to say that in every complaint, there is a desire. So if you have a complaint about what is a turnoff for you or what behavior your spouse is doing that just doesn't feel good to you during sex, if all you do is say that, there's a high risk that your partner will be defensive, feel rejected, feel inadequate, all these things. But if, in addition to your complaint, the thing that isn't working for you, you also convey what you desire, then not only are you pointing out the problem, you're providing a solution. Because if your spouse has thought you enjoyed this or has just been completely unaware and thought it was working, and you say it's not working, then one of the main things they're left with is confusion. Okay, well, what do I do instead? And chances are, if what they've been doing isn't working for you, you're going to know a lot better what they should do instead than they do. So the main thing in telling a spouse what isn't working for you is to be direct, to be clear. It's that behavior, it's not them. And let's try this instead. It doesn't mean you know what's going to feel good to you necessarily, especially if you haven't experienced it before, but you can be responsible and creative and say, I'm not actually sure what's going to be better for me, but let's try this and see if we both enjoy it. So, the thing that I really, really want to leave you with is this understanding that having a fantastic relationship is a learnable skill, having great sex is a learnable skill, and having meaningful, positive conversations about the sex you're having is also a learnable skill. And the key is to just start wherever you are and expand a little bit from there with naming what you've enjoyed with one another. And if it's more comfortable, you can start in general terms and then work your way into acknowledging what's been good together with more specificity, with more reference to anatomy and the sensations you've had. And you can, from there, build on what else you'd like to do differently, something you'd like to try. Again, I suggest you start small so that the two of you can be comfortable with the skill of introducing new things into your sex life. And then you can go from there to whatever bigger desires you already have or you soon discover once you're approaching things this way. And in the context of such conversations, certainly say what isn't working for you and make sure it's not that your spouse isn't working for you, it's the way they're touching or not touching you that isn't working for you, and give some guidance on what would create a more successful sexual experience for the two of you. Now, if you're watching this alone and you're not really confident about getting started, then ask your spouse to watch this presentation too. And if the two of you are watching this together and you're ready to dive in and have amazing conversations, well, please do. It's almost over. I won't be keeping you from it. And if that's not actually how you're feeling, I warmly encourage you to start by having a conversation about this presentation. What did you learn from it? What stuck out for you? What were you inspired by in what I've shared? What do you disagree with? What doesn't interest you at all in what I've shared? What are your hopes for how this presentation can serve the two of you? And sure, it won't exactly be a conversation about the sex you're having, but it will be a very meaningful conversation that will prepare you for such conversations if you first focus on what you each received from this presentation. And I want to be sure to tell you that my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, gives many, many more tools on how to have conversations that are productive and lead to more passion, whether you're talking about sex in the way that I've shared today, or you're talking about who's going to clean up the kitchen, or whether or not it's time to sell your house and move to a different one, or whether or not to have another child, like whatever mundane, where to keep the keys when you come in the house, like whatever mundane conversation or grand conversation, mathematical, logistical, or sexual, sensual, and erotic, there are ways to have those conversations that allow you to be closer to one another in ways that inevitably enhance your sexual experiences and the erotic passion you share with one another. So I really hope you implement everything I've shared today, and you can find more of the same sort of thing in my book, Uncompromising Intimacy. And for now, have a really great conversation.